All right, welcome back to Case Studies. I'm excited to spend some time with my longtime dear friend, looking extra skinny with the mustache and the belt buckle, just like full-blown cowboy right now.
It's a little country swag.
The swag is real. You got the boots, you got it going on. So Devin, me and you have known each other for a long time, and we have been through some absolute
ringers
together. And I think what makes me endeared to people that I've been through the low times and the high times with is you figure out how people act in the good times and the bad times. And I think the thing that I've always admired so much about you is you were the same guy when you were riding high. And, when I was a 21-year-old kid and came to work at, this first sales company, and you're the big man on campus and running the top team. And I thought you walked on water. I remember going to like this regional retreat and you're up there training. I'm like, oh my gosh, like if I could be that, that would be it, like this would change my life.
You've arrived.
And then you go fast forward to, kind of a nuclear bomb that went off for a couple of years. And, and we can get into all that, but I just, it's been so fun for me, both being in the journey with you and watching you and cheering from you from afar to getting back together and collaborating on things. It's just, you've been the same guy every step of the way. And I just love seeing good people win. And it's fun to see you win along the way, So anyway, I'm so excited to spend some time with you.
Well, that's sure nice of you to say. That means a lot to me. With someone who I hold in such high regard to, hear those thoughts means a lot to me.
No, it's there's so many things I remember. So I want to go back to, the get-go. So, maybe we start like post-mission, because I think that's like a good time. So, you went on a mission. You and your brother are at Atlas Marketing. And Derek.
Well, when I got off my mission, he was still on a mission.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I had my heart set on playing football. And I had some lingering issues with a spine fracture and then a torn up,
But you were a great like high school player. Like you were a guy.
I was above average. I wasn't
played college.
I wasn't like if they had a star system back then, maybe I was a 4. I definitely wasn't a 5-star athlete or anything, but I was good enough to go play at the U or somewhere. And, but I got back on my mission, started training, and I just didn't have it anymore. And I couldn't hack it. And so that was a unfortunate thing because, it kind of broke my heart a little bit. But then when I wasn't playing at the U, I didn't really want to go to school at the U.
Yeah.
So then I started looking at other options. That's how I ended up at Utah State.
Yep.
And then that puts me on a whole nother path, And so, that's where I met you. I think we probably got recruited the same year. I don't know. Did Doug recruit?
I think you were a year before me.
Both?
Yeah, okay. I think you were a year before me.
My first summer was 2004 in Denver with Doug.
Yep.
And then we came back. So you probably maybe that next year.
I think it was 2005. Yeah.
Okay. And that was, those were really good times. I mean, maybe too good. I ended up dropping out of college because, I made $80,000 in a year. Like I'm a king, It's
I was upstairs and I was talking to a couple of these guys that, are good friends of ours. It's Jeff Danley and Jamie Dunn, and they ran Peak Ventures, which turned into Album. They run Peak, really successful guys, but they're like, went to Wharton, did all the stuff, like just, so sharp, and they're kind of going around the room and it's, daughters go to Columbia and Dave's like, when I was in my MBA, I'm talking to this guy, and there's kind of this moment where they're like, hey, how
about you?
Where do you guys go? Like, I dropped out of UVU, but I remember it was that time, it was like, I remember being at, in like this heady experience of like, man, we're going to go take over the world. Like we're unstoppable. And there was like this feeling in 2004, 5, 6 of, you just couldn't be stopped. And there was a culture, that company had this really unique culture where there were so many good things about it. It was all about growth and mindset and abundance and so many things that still influence me to this day.
Well, you look at today and that feeling isn't necessarily wrong. I mean, you look at the leadership of that group. Talk about some phenomenal people, not just from a success, financial standpoint, but, there was some really incredible individuals. And you look at where they're at today and think, man, how did these 20, 25 guys all work at the same place, the same time?
Sure.
That was a really special time. And so I'm glad I got to cut my teeth. On one hand, I hate that we had to go through what we went through. On the backside of it, it maybe is the best thing that ever happened to me. I mean, I could probably say that with assurance.
So this is a good lesson that I want to jump into. So, you went there and you were as successful as anybody in that company, kind of a top manager, top rep, regional manager. And then, made money, invested money. You were real active, come from an entrepreneurial family. Your dad's an entrepreneur, so you'd kind of grown up with that, a lot of that in your wife's side of the family. And then the music kind of stops.
Yeah.
So talk about that, because this was like a real inflection point.
Yeah. That was really hard for a number of reasons. I think probably the worst was the humiliation, because you go from being a dude, you go from making money, being above average in productivity and what you're able to accomplish. I'd rolled some money into some real estate deals and done really
well.
Yeah, like not just above average, like more money in one transaction than I thought I would ever see in my lifetime. And I'm like 22 or 23. Yeah. But I think that I know I was a personality type that would have kept pushing.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate and unfortunate to be doing that kind of work in that sort of like 2002, 2003 to 2007 time period, because the economy was so strong. Money was just flowing like water. If you had a heartbeat, you could get money from somewhere to do something with.
Yep.
And we did, and we found a lot of success. But when you're pushing like that and you're a bit naive and don't realize there's a downside to that market curve, you just push it. And so, a few weeks before I got married is when we kind of found out this bomb had gone off.
I didn't realize it was like that. So you were single for a lot of that.
I was single the whole time. And I was living like I was single. I mean, I had this house I had no business having. I had the best truck you could get. I had a 7 Series BMW when I was 22. Like, come on. You get with that use it or lose it policy. It's like, you got all this money. You have to spend on the car. You don't get the car.
Talk to me about that, because this, it's so funny looking back. But in the moment, it was like, they literally had a policy in that company that it was like $1,000 or
$1,200 a month.
$1,200.
But if you didn't use it all, you didn't get it
as a car allowance.
Yeah. And there was some logic behind it, because you're in this industry where you're trying to attract the best talent. So you want your leadership to portray productivity and success and it's a money thing, so, you driving that parking lot, you got Porsches and Ferraris and BMW, it's like a car dealership in there.
I remember just like, I remember like I'm driving like a Range Rover, like a supercharged Range Rover.
Yeah.
And pull up to like my parents. They're just like, what are you doing? Like, are you, but in my mind, I was just in it, I was like, this is it.
I'm being a producer.
I'm being a producer. And so, we're going through that, and it goes until it doesn't. So much.
No one had connected the dots that when you go and you get a lease or a loan on these, you got $1,000 a month payment because you got to use up that bandwidth. Like, if the music stops and the company paying those bills isn't paying the bills anymore, you still obligated,
And that was kind of, I remember those lessons. I was talking to a kid last night at my house, and he's going through it's his first business experience. He's 25 years old, good friend, and his business kind of ripped the last couple of years, and then it fell off kind of just as quick.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to the point where he's writing checks to keep the business open.
Yeah.
He's 24, you know, and
yeah.
it's fun when you're getting checks. It's not fun when you're working 60 hours a week and you're paying.
Yeah.
And he's going through it and he's talking to it. And I think he kind of wanted me to save him or help him. And I just told him, I just said, hey, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
And you're not going to end up on the street.
Yeah.
So you got to, safety net.
Yeah.
But you got to go fix this.
Yeah.
Because I can't give you this lesson. I'm telling you. And I told him my experience.
Yeah.
I had a couple of homes. We're building a house. I still remember we're under construction on a house. And back then, if you started construction, it's worth $300,000-$400,000 more by the time you finish. That was just in my simple mind. That was 2004 through 2006. It was just this explosion.
Yes.
Until it wasn't. And I remember the market crashed and Lehman Brothers went under and Bear Stearns went under and Atlas, the company we were with, goes under.
Yep.
And I'm in this house. And I've got a construction loan, and the house is probably worth $200,000 to $300,000 less than the loan on the house,
and probably a construction loan that's not going to be long term. So you got to figure out how to refinance.
And it was one of those things. I still remember like laying in my bed, staring at the wall.
Yeah,
and I can't sleep, and I don't have the heart to like fully explain to my wife how bad of a situation I put us in.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there going like, what did I do and how do I get myself out of this?
Yeah. How did I get here and how do I get out?
But getting myself out of it and having the conversation with my wife and us getting on the same page and digging deep, and that's the gold in my life. Like that is the foundation, of all of my future success, was learning that I can dig deep and I can go make it happen. And you were right there. That thing, it didn't just affect you, because your dad literally came in and wrote a loan to pay back ends for that company.
Yeah.
And it kind of was like a fraudulent thing. Like it wasn't, it wasn't disclosed.
Yeah. I mean, when we had to foreclose on the business and now you're going through the bank accounts trying to figure out where money went, and you're like, oh, money was transferred there, didn't go there. You're like, you see, your eyes are open. You're like, oh man,
this is a mess.
This is a mess. And those were really hard days. You feel bad for that. He had some collateral on real estate, but it was all worthless. Not worthless, but even a 50% LTV didn't get your money back. So it was dark days, and I wasn't married yet, and so I was in this weird dynamic because I had gone through this dating phase. Quality of life, expectations of how life is going to be is at a certain place, a certain level, and then it's not.
Yeah.
And it's even worse than that, because, you go into basically bankruptcy, and it's hard to go through not being able to pay bills. It's hard to go through trying to get rid of real estate that you can't own. And I had, these rentals over here and these here, and these were rented, but these weren't, but the rent on these couldn't cover the mortgages of all of them. And so you're playing this game of like, pay this mortgage because the debt collector just called you and that's the hottest fire. But eventually it just all collapses.
Yeah.
And so that's hard. But what was harder is just how embarrassed and humiliated you are, because in your heart, I can do better than this. Like, I know my potential is here, and I'm here. Like that disparity, I think, was harder than anything.
Yeah.
But not knowing
how you're
the path to get out, and I think what you shared about your conversation with this kid yesterday is wise, because, I knew a few individuals with money. I remember, I didn't talk to my dad a lot, but I remember one conversation this summer I had where I was like, hey, I called an attorney and I think I'm going to file for bankruptcy. I don't know what to do. And the answer wasn't like, I'll write a check and, refinance this mess you're in. It was just like, well, let me know how it goes.
Yeah.
And it was like,
he let you fail.
Yeah. And so there's parts of me that really appreciates that, for a few reasons. But what came out of that is when I eventually got settled, got my head screwed back on, I took jobs that I hated, and those jobs turned into other jobs that I didn't love, but jobs that I learned in, which led to what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
And I didn't get to get bailed out of the mess I made. I didn't get to, run a family business. Like, it was just, you were at scratch. You were at zero. You were at less than zero because you owed way more than you had. I didn't, you go from like having way more money every month than you know what to do with, to not being able to even pay your bills next week.
Yeah.
And so that was really humiliating, very difficult to go through. But when I got to where what kind of got me on the path to what we're doing today, everything I did was different. Even when we were faced with buying our first vehicles and trucks for the business, I was so scared to death. I just assumed we were going to be going out of business every 30 days. And so when we had to go buy a truck, for example, I would never get a truck loan. It probably would have made more sense. But for me, I just assumed that things were going to work out, and I wanted to have something that I could sell to get out of it. I didn't want to have a bank calling me, repossessing vehicles, because I'd been through that before.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just be able to say, like, look, if this doesn't work out, I can sell the truck, and just be done. And so that forced us or held us back from growing. And so, you could probably debate that, but what it did is it drove our roots deeper in the ground, because if I needed to hire someone, I had to go sell more accounts, spit off some margin, and then I could hire.
You were bootstrapping it.
Yeah.
Like
I didn't have an investors. I didn't have, I couldn't go get a job because I didn't have a degree. I would have taken the first like high quality executive assistant role anyone would give me.
No, it's so funny. I was talking to Bart Longson, and that time was so emotional for so many people, and young people they don't know how intense that was.
Yeah.
And I remember Bart, Bart's as successful as anybody I know in my network, founder of multiple companies, big net worth, big investor. But he said in that moment, it literally got down to the spot where he had like 1 month of cash left.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes to his wife and he's like, I need to like submit a resume. He's like, but I don't even know like what to put on it, and he's going through this process of like, hey, how do I, and it's kind of like that, like look yourself in the mirror and say, I'm either in or I'm not, that's where you figure out what you're made of, and it truly is that kind of iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
That pressure that creates diamonds. And
not only that, but it makes you realize like, okay, when you've been as bad as it can get, not in life, a family death or health problems would be surely worse, but just from like an economic providing from your family standpoint, when you've been as bad as it can get, meaning you owe way more than what you have, you're literally negative, you can't pay your bills, you don't know how you're going to feed your family, and then you eventually survive, you realize your risk tolerance changes. Not that you do unwise things, but you're able to get out of that mold of like, oh, I've got to have this 9-to-5 job that pays a salary because I've got like, you're like, hey, I figured out how to give us shelter. I figured out how to feed us. We survived. So like this next decision I'm making, I want to manage the risk, but it doesn't hold you back because you've been to where as bad as it can get and you survive. So
one of the greatest things, and I think about this from psychology standpoint, was going through that refiner's fire of learning how to sell, learning how to create revenue, personally be a personal producer of revenue. Like I can wake up in the morning, I can go create value out of thin air just by hustling, calling, selling.
No doubt about it.
And I remember did that those years at Atlas and I lost everything. Not only did I lose everything, I was worse off than I got started.
Yeah.
Because I had liabilities. I remember we bought this. I was 1/5 partner in this gym, and 3 of the 5 partners go bankrupt. And so they're calling the people who still are still in the game. They're like, hey, you've signed for the whole lease. And I'm like, but I only own a fifth of it. And they're like, oh, it's, someone else's problem.
Yep.
And I remember it was me and Doug Robinson that were the only ones that stuck with it and actually like paid off that lease.
Mm-hmm.
But mine got to the spot where I went and sat down I was too good for door-to-door sales. In my mind, I was always too good for that industry.
Yeah.
For some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but like my ego told me that that's a part-time, short-term job.
Yep.
And that storm forced me to realize, hey, this is the only skill you got.
Yep.
And you're all in on this skill. And I also I think back about Todd Peterson and Alex Dunn and Keith Nielsen and Sean Brenchley, and they were so proud of the company they'd built.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going from kind of being ashamed of being a salesman, and also like ashamed of my situation, embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I meet these guys and they're really proud to run a company
in that space.
And they knew who they were, and they knew that where they were going. And I remember just being around those leaders. It was a gift from God because it gave me this confidence. And it was kind of like, if it's good enough for these guys, it's good enough for me.
Yeah.
And I hit so rock bottom that I was all in. And it was that commitment that I look back at my career and say, I don't think I would have committed that deep. Like we were driving to Arizona, and you remember this, like we drive to Arizona and it's like, I'm not coming home till I sell 10 accounts.
Yeah.
Cause I needed that commission to go live for the next month.
Yeah.
And through that, like burn the boats time, it set the tone for the next career, and it was beautiful. And, for mine was a lot different than yours though, because you came to Apex, but you were in a much different situation. You had all sorts of Atlas liabilities that were hanging out there. You had your dad that was in the deal. You had like these responsibilities that pulled you back in.
Yeah.
That you couldn't just like be done
with. Get
with.
away from.
And for me, I was done. I was kind of like, I cleaned the slate.
Yeah.
And I was just all in on this opportunity. And so both of us kind of went and sold that summer, but then you kind of went back and you had to go still years of cleaning up the mess.
Yeah. I mean, when you got judges requiring you to be in court on a foreclosure or whatever, it's like, you don't have the option to just say like, oh, I'm at a new job on the other side of the country. Like, peace out. Don't bother me. Like you have these things you have to deal with. But that experience, that's the thing that I wish I could articulate to guys in that industry. It's like, look, you don't have to love it. You don't have to listen to the story about like, oh, just find what you love to do and do that forever. Like I just don't think that's real. I think you can find fulfillment in whatever you're doing. And sometimes you just have to do what you have to do.
Yeah.
And pay attention and find your way. Like for me, door-to-door sales saved my life from the standpoint of when I got to what became First Mile and I was selling like shipping products door to door, the way I was doing it was impossible to survive on for probably 3 years. And we didn't survive on it. And so I had just gone and got a Dish Network retailership with Dish. And so during the days when I was selling the shipping stuff door to door, I would change my shirt. I'd go to a gas station, get a Monster at 5 o'clock. And as people going from warehouses during the day or going home, I'm now showing up in neighborhoods and I'm selling Dish door to door at night. That I could live on. You could get your $200 commission from Dish every time you sold something. You sell one a night or one every other night or whatever. You could sell 4 to 8 in a week as a side job, just working at night. And that was enough to live on. So being able to have that weapon enabled me the freedom during the days to build this book of business over years.
I had never heard that part of the story. So
yeah,
literally
I just little company, Prime Wireless. And so when I'm starting doing the stuff during the day, you never could have done that, just come out of college or whatever, because at least for me, if you got a wife and a whatever, you got to pay rent, you had a new kid, you're making pennies every time someone shipped a box.
Yeah.
Like you can't live on that.
Sustain it. You can't pay yourself a salary. The business doesn't
you
have
can't even
any
go
surplus.
to McDonald's,
Yeah.
So you had to have another thing and you couldn't go get a regular job, but I could just I could go sell stuff. So that's what I did for 3 or 4 years is I would try and build the book of business during the days and solve the shipping problems during the day. But at nights, from 5 o'clock till it was dark, I was selling dish. And Danny Woodhouse would help me. Bryce would help me. I'd call them. I got a job. Can you come install this thing? And so for a couple of years, I'd just have 1 or 2 guys that would install my job. So I'd live on the income from what I had learned earlier. And that afforded me the freedom to go chase other things. It wasn't easy, and it was really dark days just in terms of like, hey, I'm gone from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. doing my day job, and I'm gone from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. doing my night job. But it is what it is. Like and I didn't love it. It wasn't my passion. But because what I was doing during the days, I was paying attention. I was seeing like, okay, I got this customer base built up now and they could use these other products, but no one's providing that product to them. I think I could do it if I built this little piece of technology and I bought this truck and I started picking these things up and taking them there and doing this. No one's doing that. Like, okay, I'll try it. And you just start solving those problems. I wouldn't have been able to do that.
You wouldn't have the time.
If I wouldn't have had the time and I wouldn't have the money because I couldn't have fed the family.
Yeah.
So being able to lean on just going out and hunting at nights and dragging a carcass home so we could eat. I couldn't have done that without it.
It's so special, man. That's like, that fires me up so much. I'd never heard that piece of the story. I had one of these conversations with Ryan Ralph and Mitch Casey, who built Dime Beauty. Yep. They were actually, they have some connection to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Ryan worked when I don't know if it was right after college or what, but he worked with us for a while.
Yeah.
And he was great. And actually Dime's one of our customers.
But so they had a really similar thing where they're building Dime, nights and, during the day. But then they created this side hustle that was actually like making a lot of money, a couple $100,000 a year. And they're just feeding all of their profits into this beauty company that's just burning cash.
Yeah.
And they got to the point where like, should we just do the one that makes money and stop the one that's burning? And then it flipped. And ultimately, like it was this, like they built this beautiful company and, had a, phenomenal outcome, a crazy outcome. But they were able to do that because they had that skill to go create capital on nights and weekends. And I think what you're describing is that it's having like this skill set that gives you the confidence that you don't need a 9 to 5, that you don't need to ask anybody for permission to go make money, that you could make money on a Saturday, you could make money on a Sunday, you could make money at 9 p.m. And that's a very like powerful skill set that I think is so underrated for young professionals. Like when I'm at BYU and I'm teaching at BYU, I'll say this and I get kickback sometimes, but I'm like, if I ran this school, it would be a mandatory internship to go sell for a summer and to have that tool in your toolkit, regardless of what you go into, if it's finance, if it's accounting, if it's dentistry, if it's whatever it is, it's just to be able to actually have a specialized skill set to go create revenue.
Well, it just has so much application. It's not about selling the product. It's not about the money you make at the summer. Sales really is just the skill to be able to communicate your point of view in a way that somebody else understands it the way you do, right? Because if you feel this way about this thing, but I can't articulate that to you and help you see my point of view, you're not going to buy into whatever it is I'm trying to explain. And there's no better way to do that than on the doors. And so now if you're a doctor helping a patient or you're a accountant trying to help a client understand why he can't do this and how it affects his P&L, like whatever you're doing, it's just the ability to communicate to someone something in a way that they understand it the way you do. And like, I can't think of anything in life where that wouldn't be of value.
Valuable.
Yeah.
In your marriage. Like I can't tell you how many times like I'm like persuading my wife that I'm doing a good job, that we have a great marriage, like that it's like all the skills, it's listening, it's anticipating concern, it's these communication skills that, it's one thing if you practice them every once in a while, it's something else if it's 6 days a week.
Yeah.
like all day, every day, repetition, study, and it specializes and it tightens those skills. And they've just, they go with you, and we could go on this topic forever.
Well, one last thing I'll say is that this was eye-opening to me and how much I appreciated the door-to-door industry. Years into what I'd been doing, I was in a situation in Florida, and I was at the headquarters of one of the biggest companies in the world. And I was in this particular negotiation on this contract, and I'm with their CEO, and we're going back and forth on these just couple deal points that we just couldn't get together on. And it was like this and then that. And then it kind of dawned on me, I'm going to kind of change the way this is being positioned. And I essentially came back to him with a couple options that worked for us. All of them worked for me. And I didn't really care which one. And as I was leaving, I realized I option closed this guy, CEO of one of the world's largest companies.
Yep.
And that was a little thing I'd learned in one of my little sessions from John Schiltz.
Yeah.
One of our morning sessions, we did a whole training on option closes, and we'd go through and would you like this channel or this channel? Would you like this many hours of DVR or that? Just ways to get someone to a yes. You don't care what it's for. And it was like, oh my gosh, those little door-to-door meetings in the morning can affect your life if you take it serious.
You fast forward 15 years and it's like, you're talking tens of millions of dollars,
massive impacts.
9-10 figure deal.
Yeah.
That has the exact same tools or like fundamentals.
It's all the same thing. It's just communicating with people. No matter how big the company is, it doesn't, how impenetrable the situation is. Every organization, company on planet Earth is just people.
Yep.
And being able to communicate with them is that's the name of the game. And I don't know of a better place to learn that than on the door. So I think your opinion of having that be a critical part of a curriculum is very well placed.
Talk to me about First Mile, because this was something that like literally you created out of your garage.
Yep.
And it turned into like this beautiful business.
Well, I didn't have a garage at that time, but it was out of a 1992 rusted out Jeep Grand Cherokee. So
what was First Mile? What was the problem that you were solving?
Well, it would be probably a 4-hour whiteboard session to really understand the details of logistics, but at its core, I had built up this customer base over these 3 or 4 years of selling a very specific postal product that we had the ability to earn a little bit of arbitrage on. The problem is for most companies, it was very difficult to get access to it. But because I had built up this customer base, I started to realize there were other products in the market, other networks that really big companies could utilize that were very difficult for small to medium-sized companies to use. And there were some really big limitations. The two biggest were technology and being able to generate, I'll call it generate shipping labels in a way that could be received into these terminals that weren't just UPS, FedEx, or USPS. And so there was a big technology limitation on the front end, but then also just getting packages into these networks. So literally getting them from point A into that point of induction where big companies, if you were Apple,
that was the gap.
There was two, that was the gap. And the bridge was some technology and someone willing to like literally get in a car, pick stuff up, change the oil, change the tires, and deal with the hard work.
Wow.
And so I was like, oh, here's a way I could reroute these packages that would save you a lot of money and I could maybe make some money. The problem is, I don't know, there's no way to generate the labels you'll need unless you have a development team on staff, and you don't, and I don't. And then even if you could, I don't know how you're going to get them from, the south end of Spanish Fork to the terminal out in Salt Lake or Denver or California that they need to get to for you to even use the product. And so the short version is I strung together some software that enabled these little tiny shippers to access these shipping networks that usually only large companies could access. And I literally just said, well, look, if they won't pick it up, I will. I'll be here every day at this time. And I started picking up packages in my Jeep. And so during the days I would sell and I'd do a customer service and I'd do the billing and all this stuff. And then at nights about 6 o'clock, I'd start going to these little locations and putting packages in my Jeep. And then I'd take them over to the mail terminals at night at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I'd help them process orders until 2 in the morning.
How important do you think it is to do all of those jobs personally? To start, it's, I think, very important because you understand how one thing affects the other. I also think it's very important to realize when you're holding yourself back because you're so possessive of doing it the way you think it needs to be done. Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be done another way. But if you're the only guy who thinks you can do your billing the right way or can do your shipping the right way or whatever, and you're trying to do everything or micromanage everything, you can only get so far, right? Yep. So you've got to be able to get outside of yourself at some point. But I mean, for a long time, probably maybe a decade, I think I knew, not only did I know every customer, I knew a lot of their family members. I knew birthdays of kids. I was invited to weddings of customers that are working in warehouses, company Christmas parties that I'm not even an employee of. I was just so ingrained.
You're a part of the family. Like
I just knew everything about the business.
Yeah.
I knew when someone was billed wrong. I knew the details of the shipment. I knew why. I knew how the operations of some of our vendors worked better than they did.
Yeah.
I've had sales guys of industries say, oh, this product does this, and this. I was like, no. In your facilities, they do it this way. And that's why what you're saying won't work.
You knew their business better than they did.
Because I was spending time in their mail terminals and they weren't. They were just looking at the marketing material that gets sent out in the quarterly review of the sales training.
Yep.
They didn't know how things actually worked on the ground. And so that really enabled me to solve problems that nobody else could solve for a long time. And so it allowed us to get going. But it wouldn't have lasted me doing everything. Like we had to start very early and very consistently investing in technology to afford us scale.
To go scale.
It could be a great idea and I could maybe get 20, 30, 40, 50 customers and have like a little book of business that was paying our bills. But we were never getting beyond that if we couldn't scale it.
Yep.
And that took a lot to be able to scale.
And so you built that company to how big before you sold to Rakuten?
We were probably maybe 85, 90 employees, maybe 90 million a year, 85 million a year, something like that.
But growing like crazy.
Growing pretty good. I mean, nothing like some of these tech startups that can, because our business is very hands-on. Like we physically got to pick up packages, move it. Like we can't add 1,000 customers in a day because people are just clicking a button to sign up for something and start using something online, right? Like we have to really get our hands bloody and dirty to bring on a customer. And so the growth is a little bit slower, but a pretty good clip. I mean, in 10 years, we went from $0 to probably 90 million. And we actually sold 2 companies. One was First Mile. One was called 360, which was like a pick and pack fulfillment operation. They both worked with the same kind of customer, like e-commerce, but one's a carrier that like would go and compete with FedEx, for example, if you're putting them in boxes. The other one works with the same customer, but one in which they don't want to deal with the warehouse. And we put their goods from China in our warehouse.
Of course.
And as their orders come in, we ship them out for them.
Yeah.
And so I sold both of those to Rakuten.
And what was Rakuten's desire to own First Mile? You know what I mean? Because for people who don't know, it's like one of the biggest companies in the world. You're basically the Amazon of Japan. Like they're a force of nature.
Oh, they deal with B's and T's, right? Like their gross, I don't know what their gross merchandise value is, but it's got to be $1 trillion something. I don't know. But they're massive. They're like exactly like you said, you'd compare them to like the Amazon.
But why would that company come in and say, I want to go buy a 90 million of rev company in
Well, the
Utah,
short version is they owned probably, I don't know, 60, 70 companies in the United States. And it started probably 20 something years ago. And they did a lot of innovation. They acquired some companies in the US, one of which was a fulfillment network.
Okay.
And as that company had grown for 7 or 8 years, the CEO of that company was, pretty forward thinking, great guy. And he had gone to Japan and said, hey, we want to grow from 8 facilities around the US to, we call them the top 25, the NFL cities, like the big cities in the United States. I don't think they wanted necessarily to compete with Amazon. I don't think they were that like
ambitious.
Or stupid, like you just, unless you can lose billions a quarter and have your stock price keep going up, you just can't duplicate it.
Yeah.
So I don't think they had that, but I do think they wanted an answer to it, at least for their customers, which really, if you think about that from a logistics standpoint, are really kind of 2 core things. One, distributed inventory and being able to have inventory around the United States. So as an order comes in for a customer, if one customer is in Washington, the state of Washington, you can fulfill from Northern California or Reno or somewhere in the Northwest. But if the next customer is ordering from, Florida, you want to fulfill an order from Atlanta or somewhere. You don't want to have to ship from that same facility in Reno all the way to Florida because the cost is too high. And secondarily was transportation, right? Amazon is phenomenal at optimized routing and being able to, in milliseconds, be able to determine, okay, this package is going to go this way, whether that be this carrier or this ship method or this partner, or we're going to deliver it ourselves. Like, they're very good at that. And so the short version is the CEO of this company had gone to Japan and said, we're going to grow to all these locations. You're going to probably lose a lot of money for this next few years because it's going to build it and they will come model. We're going to build out this big network. We're going to fill it up. But a part of this, you need to go acquire this transportation company because we need to get control of their technology and their assets, and we'll integrate them into this network.
Yeah.
Now we have the distributed inventory and the transportation.
So it was an important piece for them to go like scale.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And so that, that conversation took 18 months. So that's a really boiled down version, but that's essentially what happened. They acquired us. That company grew, they went from 8 facilities to I think 12. We grew pretty substantially. I remember, that was like, I think December, like literally 31st at 12:01 in the morning because of tax stuff. Like we wanted a clean year break. But I remember that, I think it was that March or April, Rudy Gobert gets COVID, Jazz shut down. In fact, we had our spring conference down in Vegas. And as we're going home, you start seeing on the plane, people wearing these masks and the TV screens are talking about this COVID thing. And you're like, oh yeah, whatever. What is this? And then you get home and Rudy's not playing and you're like, oh, this is maybe kind of serious. And I thought we were going out of business because I was like, okay, our clients aren't going to be able to get their products made in China. So they're not going to have anything to sell. We're not going to have anything to ship. Like we're done. And then right after that, we have remember that earthquake we had?
Of course.
I mean, we have this big earthquake, stuff's like falling off shelves. And I'm like, the world's ending.
It's the end of days. Done. It's the end of days.
And then within 30 days, it's like
gangbusters.
Because no one's going to the stores. Everyone's buying literally every part of their life online. And we're like, oh no.
We're going to break.
Yeah, because, and luckily they had their first CapEx payment due about that time. So we invested in our first sort machine with that money. And it was about 6 weeks delayed. And we had every cousin, brother, aunt, uncle, and nephew of every employee we had out in our warehouse trying to sort packages by hand because we couldn't keep up. We're going until 4 a.m. with any person with a heartbeat we could get to help us sort these packages until that sort machine got going. And so then we kind of leveled up our infrastructure and we were able to do it. And then we had some of our best years through COVID, just from a revenue standpoint. It was inflated because of COVID. But what happens is you have this crazy revenue spike from COVID, right?
Yep.
But for us, we got trucks, we got to touch stuff, do stuff. So you're investing in this technology to keep up with the demand.
Yeah.
Well, now you come off that backside of COVID, right? And you can't just, if 20% of the volume goes down because COVID's over, you can't just like turn down 20% of your fuel costs. You can't just turn down 20% of your sort machine.
Yeah. I mean, that was the craziest. There were so many businesses that got that COVID bump and it was a curse. Like it put a lot of companies out of business. I think about the Pelotons. I think about these companies that you get this growth that you have to go respond to.
Yeah.
that you're signing leases and you're making CapEx investments and you're like buying inventory and you're doing all this stuff. And then when that falls off, you're kind of left holding the bag.
Oh, man, in a big way. In a big way, especially if you're a product company. There's a lot of product companies that they couldn't get product fast enough. So they're putting in these massive orders. They finally get all these bikes or ATVs or all these out camping gear. No one's buying anymore. And your ship just showed up.
Yeah. I mean, my personal COVID experience, I remember Ty Mattingly and Bodie Gardner, they come to me and they're like, hey, we're buying this PPP equipment. And like, it's impossible to get.
Yeah.
Everybody's freaked out, you know, about like the world ending and like they can't buy this stuff fast enough. You know, the shelves are. And so we buy like crate loads of this stuff, like from China.
Yeah.
And by the time it shows up, the music had stopped.
Yeah.
And we have freight loads of like this, like stuff you like clean like a, you know, like your table. And like the ultimate outcome was we ended up like writing it off and, you know, just
donate it.
Yeah. Just donating and trying to optimize your tax write-off.
Honey, we got face masks for the rest of our life. We need more poopy diapers around here to have a reason to put these on.
That was me getting caught. And I think about me on like a small scale writing, you know, the $1 million check.
Yeah.
Which sucks. But then I take some of these companies that I'm like, you've just signed 20-year leases. You've signed 10-year leases on 100,000, 500,000 square feet of warehouse. And you don't need them anymore. You know, invested in the equipment to build these bikes or whatever it is, you know, it literally, it ended a lot of companies.
Yeah. It's hard. We were lucky to survive. And, you know, when we sold, I signed a contract. So I never left First Mile. I stayed on as a CEO. But I was staying on for 4 years and we did that. But knowing, one of the hard parts about that is, you know, we had an earnout, we had to hit certain numbers, and I think we were about 98.5% of our numbers. So, you know, that was great. But I knew I had a
cliff
date I was getting fired. So 12, 18 months before then, you know, I had saved money. We'd set it aside. My wife, we'd been wanting to build a house for a long time, but we held off till we had the cash set aside to build the house and not have to get a mortgage. And, you know, we'd done some stuff. We have a little restaurant in town we remodeled, and the gas station we helped, you know, get going with the business partner who's up there, amazing guy. Some real estate project, just like I got ready
to
move on.
Yeah, to be on.
That part of my life, the book was closing, and I was just going to get my fingers in the soil of another life. And that was well on its way. And then, oh crap hits, you know, like in a good way. You know, because Rakuten, they had some leadership changes that sat between Japan and the US. And so the guys that were the original cheerleaders of this whole vision, you know, they had changed. And so the new guys that replaced them, they just naturally aren't going to feel the same way as the guys who started.
So maybe let me pause to kind of give context. So you sold the business.
Sold both companies, but I stayed on the CEO of one of them.
You had an employment agreement to stay for 4 years. There's an earnout for, you know, additional stock. You kind of work to go hit that number, but you were fully planning on transitioning. And within that time, Rakuten, this massive company who had kind of a head coach or whoever it is that's like over, you know, the US or this region.
Yeah.
They changed leadership, and the new leadership doesn't believe in that strategy. And so this business kind of falls in limbo where this is somebody else's idea. This is somebody else's project. And to compound that, it's losing money.
Yeah. And on purpose, right? Because they had this original proposal called for that, you know, for some time. And so, you know, and with them being publicly traded, you know, they've never told me exactly why they wanted to sell. So a lot of this is just me reading the tea leaves. But when you have, it's not really someone deciding they're not interested in it, but it's someone who's not jumping into the trenches with you when it's hard because they feel invested in the thing. It's just like, what are you guys doing? Like, you know, you don't understand it. It's just not their thing, and they're not emotionally connected to it. And when it's one company's, you know, 150 million a year in revenue at that point, and the other one's 80 or 90 million a year. when you're dealing with billions over here,
it's like
this mosquito, you know? And so it just made sense for them to divest. They were divesting, I think, of some other companies in the US, and trying to refocus on some things. And so they went to market with our companies and that was fine. So it actually went under contract. Somebody was going to buy this division of companies, this big fulfillment network, as well as this carrier. So
this is a really great part of the story, because this, comes back to like your gift with people. So they go under contract, they go to market.
Yep.
And Japanese culture, it's very reserved. It's very respectful.
Yes.
There's process.
Yep.
And American culture, it's kind of cowboy, and that clash of cultures ended up blowing up the deal. They basically,
yeah. I mean, the Japanese culture is it can be tough to work in, but just like you say, they're very respectful, very proper. They're also extremely bureaucratic, lots of decision-making, lots of committees.
Yeah.
They want everyone's buy-in. They want everyone to have their turn to give their say, but at the same time, they want to know that if things go bad, it wasn't their decision, and it went under contract, and the individual with it under contract, I think, didn't jive with that culture real well, and it ended up kind of blowing up the deal. He
kind of retrading on it, right?
Yeah, it went under contract under one set of circumstances, and the way he approached trying to change those circumstances, I think, didn't really flow with the culture of how the Japanese take that information. And so in the end, the deal fell apart. And so there was this time where our executive team had helped during due diligence, creating a succession plan, creating strategies for all this stuff. So they very much were aware of what was going on and how we were going to transition to now I know it's falling apart. Nobody else knows it's falling apart. I've got to communicate to our team what's going on, especially since 90 days, 3-4 months from now, I'm going to be gone.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to get feedback on like, what do you want me to tell like your employees? And I couldn't really get that. And, at first, and then I finally got someone on the line to say like, what's the strategy? And they didn't really know yet. They were going to kind of get back to me, and in short, a comment was made like, well, why don't you buy these back? And it's like, well, because I don't have the money to float them, to be honest.
So he basically came to you and said, hey,
he didn't. I mean, the big boss didn't at all. I mean, we're talking way down the totem pole. I'm just trying to talk.
But somebody came up with the idea. Somebody said, hey, you built this business.
Not like that. It was like smart aleck remark, like, we're kind of joking, like we don't know what's going on. It's like, well, you should just buy it back. And it's like, yeah.
So it was a joke. Like
it was kind of a joke at first.
Like in passing.
And I'm like, well, I'd never do that unless it could do this, this, and this. But that wouldn't work because I'd have to do this, this, and this. And I wouldn't even have money to do that. So they'd have to do this. And it was kind of a joke at first.
Yeah.
And then we hang up and it's like, okay, we'll get back to you with what the direction is. And then a couple nights go by, and one night I can't sleep. And I'm like, I don't talk to an attorney. I don't talk to my wife. I just sit up in bed. I open a laptop, open a Word document. And I'd literally just type out like, to whom it may concern. Here's a letter of interest in acquiring my company back, as well as our sister company. Here's the set of circumstances in which I could do it. We'd have to negotiate these items, but here's some general structure. Just not thinking it'd go anywhere.
And the general structure, like in this, like I like, nothing fires me up like a well-structured deal.
Well, they're publicly traded, so we have to be a little careful how much I disclose.
But like the fundamentals have to do with like basically a purchase price that checked the box for them.
Yep.
They
check
need,
for them and for us.
They needed to be able to show, hey, this was a
fair price.
Deal.
Yep.
And on your end, you needed them to carry.
I didn't have all that money sitting in the bank account.
There was financing considerations. There was also like, this company's losing money.
Yeah.
And I need reserves in place
to for some amount of time to have time to see if I could turn it around.
And the last one that I loved, because these are like, I think back about those times where you're losing your house and you're losing your cars, and it's just complete crash and burn in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And that scar tissue.
Yep.
And then you fast forward to 2023, 2020, when you structured this deal.
Yeah.
And saying, and I'm not going to lose my house.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lose my cars.
Yeah.
I'm not personally signing for this deal.
Yeah.
And basically like making sure, learning from past mistakes. And I think about like those lessons and I'm like, that's the gold, man.
Yeah,
that's
like,
why you had to go through that experience.
That's exactly right. And the company's big enough to where, you know, it probably wouldn't make sense. Probably no individual could stand behind it anyways, you know, but you're exactly right. I mean, it was like, I mean, I had to put in more money than I could have ever fathomed putting into any one thing ever.
Yep.
So like we have a lot of chips on the table that keeps me up at night, but, we were able to structure it so that they got a fair price. I got one I could justify and stomach. We have financing in place in a way that we didn't have to go to the market and take on debt, you know, real quick. So there was a tough path, but there was a path to them getting a return on their money. There was a path to us getting the companies to where they were healthy and strong. Not an easy path, and not even a defined path per se. I just knew like, okay, we can kind of get going in this direction. And if this element's here and this element's here and this element's here, we might be able to pull this off. You know, there's still a lot of rocks that had to be turned over and figure out what's underneath them. But, you know, enough was there. It was a calculated risk.
You were confident.
Yeah. But it went back to like, hey, if this doesn't work out, they're going to lose some money. I'm going to lose a lot of money. It's really going to set us back. We're probably going to have to move. I might have to go get, you know, a regular job somewhere, whatever. But that's where going back 20 years, it's like, I've been there.
I know I can recreate
I know it might be terrible for a few years, but in the end of the day, I'll find a shelter. I know I'll keep our bellies full, and I know I'll find a way back to, you know, something that allows us to be comfortable.
I mean, what you're describing right there is the lesson to me. It's that what you're describing is like my first summer knocking doors. I remember driving home from Des Moines, Iowa, and I had this pride and this confidence. It's to this day, it's one of the like most proud moments. And I had this confidence that if things ever get bad in life, I know I can go work for 4 months and make 50 grand.
Yeah.
And it was a skill that I didn't have before that summer. And I had it, and I had it for the rest of my life, and I knew I had it.
Yeah.
And like, that's what you're describing is like that, hey, if things get bad, I know I can figure it out. Yeah. And it's this confidence in yourself and your ability to go do it that allows you to take risks that I don't think other people would be willing to go take. Like if you didn't know, if you didn't have that certainty.
If I hadn't survived that before, there's no chance I'm doing it. Because it's too scary. It's too daunting. It's too humiliating. But I've been there. I've been as humiliated as you can get.
Yeah.
And you know what? We survived. And you know what? No one cares. I mean, some idiots might care, but the people that you care most about, they don't care.
But I think that's another one of like the key insights is that the people who love you will always love you.
Yeah.
And the people who don't didn't anyway.
And you shouldn't care about them. You shouldn't care about what they think.
But they didn't anyway. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and that you when you go through, everybody loves you when everything's going good.
Yeah.
And when they go bad, you figure out who really loves you.
Yeah.
And the reality is like that group, when things go bad, is probably the group. That's your people. Like that, you know, the ones who'll stick with you when times are tough.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah. And you realize the ones around, like, especially like my wife, oh my gosh, like talk about from the time we get engaged to what reality set in, you know, 30, 60, 90 days later. And then what the ride she's had to go through. And then we go through the exit. And then I remember telling her, you know, so I send this LOI off. I don't think about it. I forget about it, honestly. I just thought it was, you know, it was a fart in the wind, man. It was gone. Like I didn't think it was ever happening. And I'm sitting in my office a few days later and I get this email. I'm like, why is that guy emailing me? I never hear from this guy. I open this email and it's my LOI sign. I'm like, oh no. You know, so I call my wife. I talked to her that night. I'm like, look, this is the situation. What this means is it doesn't mean we're buying the companies, but it means that if we follow through these steps, that's where it ends up. So there's a lot of off ramps here. Do you want me to take an off ramp, or like, what should we do? And I remember she's like, well, you're going to be busy doing something. You might as well be busy doing something that you know. And she's like, I'll, whatever you feel like is best for our family, I'll do it. Right. And I just think like, I could not have gotten through the last, sorry. I couldn't have got to the last 20 years without her because, I hear friends talk about, everyone's got a different situation at home. And everyone's got different dynamics, but the dynamic for us is such that it would have been impossible for me to fight through what we fought through, good times and bad, and to still be where we are today. And not that we're even in a great place. Like this last year has probably been the hardest year of my life, even after all the stuff we've gone through. Like I also have more to lose right now. I've got bigger problems than I've ever had to deal with right now. Somehow I'm in the best place I've ever been in my life, and I'm in the hardest place I've ever been in my life. And it's weird to have those exist at the same time.
You have like great mojo right now. Like when you show up, it feels like you're in that sweet spot. You're in that flow state of like, I feel energized for this moment. Yeah,
I think that's it. Like if I thought about all the problems that I'm dealing with, not just in our companies, but I have like 4 other full-time jobs because I thought I was done.
Yeah.
So I was like really committed, and all those things have big problems. And then you got the big problem. So it's like, it would honestly paralyze me if I thought about just all these individual things, but somehow at the same time, I feel like my feet are in the soil that they're supposed to be in.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I just feel like I'm the one for this job at this time in my life for this set of problems.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we're even going to solve the problems. Like it might, it might still do us in. I don't know.
But you're energized by it.
But I feel like we'll figure it out.
You're not like buried. Like it's not like debilitating. It's like it's a challenge. It's calling.
It's a challenge, right? You still have sleepless nights. I still have moments of like panic set in, like, oh no, like, I don't know what to do. You're like, and then you realize I've been here. I don't know what the answer is, but I know I have the skills to either find the answer or find a way to survive through it.
Yeah.
And so that is energizing. And when I know I can go home to a wife that's not barking at me when I make bad decisions and making me feel like I'm a failure, or like putting pressure on me to be at things that, albeit I probably should be at, I just can't be at right now at this time in our life. Like, to have that support
is everything.
Yeah. Because when you hear about like other situations people might be in, again, I know dynamics are different, but I could not survive, and our family could not be where we are today if I didn't have the home life that I have with her.
So I'm gonna switch gears. Got a couple of questions before we finish up. This is so fun for me. It's so fun for me to fill in the gaps, because I know the story, and I know some parts of it. We're in the trenches together, and there's others that I'm just cheering for you. But talk to me about, if you were to go back and talk to Devin Johnson at 21 years old, what advice would you give yourself now with a lot of miles under the tires? Like, what advice would you give yourself that would help you navigate the journey better?
I think it's very hard to answer this question, honestly, not to you, but to myself, because there is so much advice I would give myself that would have allowed me to steer clear of a lot of the pain that I went through. But then if I really think about that, it's that pain that taught me these invaluable things. So it almost feels disingenuous to like go back and give myself advice that allows me to navigate the landmines
better,
that are the things that taught me what I needed to learn. Having said that, I had a kid call me the other day. He was doing a college class, an entrepreneurship class, and he had to interview some entrepreneurs. And, at the end of the call was like, what advice would you give me? And what I tried to explain to him was like, look, first of all, having a business sounds really romantic. and, you know, you get a startup this and that, and entrepreneur this and that. And it's like, it's not what the magazines make it look like. It's not what social media makes it look like. It is really, really hard for a really long time in a way that most people will never understand. But if you gonna chase that, the best advice I could give myself or anybody else is when you're young, go hard and go hard smart. Meaning, don't, even if your standard of living increases, if I'm out selling doors, I'm not coming back and I'm not buying another stupid Parade Homes house like I had. I'm saying, oh, I got to use it or lose it stipend. I'll lose it. I'm fine. I'll drive the Toyota. I would work the same way, but I would live on as little as I possibly could and bank as much as I possibly could. Not so that I have a nest to go spend or retire on, so that when it comes time to chase my dream, I can afford those 3 or 4 years to really focus on the thing that doesn't make money right now, but that I want to chase. Because if you come out of college and then you get your job and then you get a $70,000 a year salary, and the first time you get a raise to $90,000, and your car goes from a Honda Civic to a Honda Accord and a Honda Accord to a Lexus and a Lexus to a BMW, every time you get a raise, and your car payment goes from $500 to $700 to $900 every time you get a raise, 8, 9, 10 years from now, when you say, man, I have this great idea I want to chase, but you have to make $110,000 a year salary to pay your bills because your standard of living has gone up, it's going to be very hard to make that jump. But if you have been really aggressive and you've socked away $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $50,000, whatever it is, now you can say, you know what? I've got this side hustle I run at nights. I'm at this point in my life where I could probably make it full time, but it won't pay me enough to go full time. If I've had that set aside, that's real freedom.
Yeah.
To chase what you want and not have to live hand to mouth, you know, off of and strain your new business because you got to feed your family.
Yep.
So if that's the thing you're going to chase, you got to pay the bills. But my advice would be, don't ratchet up your standard of living as you find success.
Yep.
Especially while you're young. You know, like, go hard, chase big dreams early, but do it smart, because you're going to have a job. You're going to have to pay the bills. But at some point, you're going to have this pivot where it's like, do I do this thing full time or not? And if you have to, if you have a mortgage you got to pay, and you've got bills you've got to pay, and you got car payments you got to pay, it's going to be next to impossible to go and chase that dream, because that dream's not going to pay your bills.
I have this visual in my mind, like crystal clear visual. And it's 2007. All hell is breaking loose in the market. Everybody's losing their houses. Businesses are going under. Some of the oldest firms in the U.S., the Bear Stearns and the Lehman Brothers, like multiple 100-year-old institutions going out of business overnight. And I remember going to Todd Peterson's house, and he's 40 years old at this time. And he's living in an apartment. He's living in half of a duplex. He's got a 10-year-old truck, and he's made a lot of money for a lot of years. Like, I'm 41. He's my age.
Yeah.
And I think of how I live and how he was living at 40.
Yeah.
And he was just so disciplined for so long. And when the zombie apocalypse hit, when the storm hit, he was playing offense.
Yeah.
And that was the difference between him going and building a, $13 billion of equity value and not, was living lean, doing what you're saying.
Yeah.
But doing it way longer than most people would think is reasonable or necessary.
Yeah.
And that was it changed my career. Him living lean allowed me to be able to come on, because he'd made good financial decisions. So his business was healthy. And I just think about that, and I'm just like, man, that piece of advice is pure gold.
Yeah.
It's pure gold.
Yeah.
One question before we finish up. This is one that I always ask because I'm just fascinated with people, especially people I admire. Talk to me about faith, and talk to me about how faith has factored in the journey, both the good times and the bad.
I think whether you're religious or not, right? Like faith from a religious standpoint, I think is probably a little bit different from a non-religious standpoint. But in any regard, right? It seems to me that I've at least found more fulfillment in providing a way for others to lift themselves up, in being able to help ease pain or suffering or struggle in a way that is maybe not noticeable to others. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like I know where that feeling comes from, but if you're not religious, there's something special in treating others in a way that we might say God would want you to treat others. But if you don't believe in God, I think it's hard to deny that there's something created in caring for others or worrying more about others than yourselves at times. And where does that come from, right? Like, I think it probably comes from God, but I think that's something that's undeniable. And so, and it feels like the more you're able to do that, it's like a muscle. You know, I don't really think that God or a higher power is like deciding who gets money. I don't really think God probably cares that much about money. But I do think that as you exercise that muscle, you become better at it, and you find ways to do it better.
Yeah.
And I don't know of any other way to have more fulfillment in life and more gratitude for what you have than to be able to help ease the suffering of others. I think that probably comes from a feeling like you're living life in a way that God would have you live it. But if you don't believe in God and if you're not religious, I think it's worth asking the question, where does that come from? Right? Because man's natural state is not helping others. Man's natural state is a caveman
surviving,
trying to survive. Yeah. And I survive at the expense of you.
Yeah.
Right. But when you live that way, there's not peace and joy. So like, where does that come from? Right. I think that comes from God. I think that comes from.
But you went through some hard times. And I think that's where I'm pressing on this, is like, not for anybody else, but for the Johnson family.
Yeah.
Where did faith factor?
Well, if I'm being totally honest, there were a lot of times where you lose faith at times because you feel so dark. You feel so humiliated. We have time for one very small story.
Of course.
The darkest it probably got for me, I didn't ever get like suicidal necessarily, but I will never forget this. That summer I had come back to door to work with Apex at that time. And I felt so much obligation because they had given, I think it was like $19,000 or something to come, like a pre-signing bonus, whatever it was. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, I gotta pay this off. Like I that weight was just so hard for me because one, I couldn't stand the fact that I needed it. And two, I wanted to get it paid back because, you guys had vouched for me, you and Jeff. And it's like, oh, I'm letting these guys down. And it was such a heavy weight to carry. I remember being at this intersection and there was a green power box, and next to that power box, you got the sidewalk, and sometimes the sidewalk buckles, where it's overlapping, and there's all this traffic coming through this intersection. I needed to cross the road. And I just remember, literally pacing off the distance from the buckled concrete to the edge of the intersection. Because it's like in my mind, I just thought like, okay, if I could trip on this piece of concrete and time it so that a car would hit my head, I don't want to die, but I don't want to be conscious. I just didn't want to have to deal with it all.
Yeah.
So that's disappointing. And then I feel like that's a time when I lost faith that I would survive because I just didn't want to have to deal with life anymore.
It was that low.
Yeah. I had a new kid. So I didn't want to go away forever. I just wanted to go away for a while. I just wanted to wake up in 6 months and deal with life 6 months from now. I didn't want to deal with today. So it's like you feel a little bad because it's like, man, I that was a knucklehead, right? And obviously you didn't do it. And, it's like, but I was there. I have to admit, I was there not wanting to die, but I just didn't want to have to be dealing with anything. It was just unbearable. And so at that time, I'm glad I had people like my wife around me, to help me see through this lack of faith that I didn't have at that time. But I talked to John Shields a lot at that time. I knew other people were struggling. I could see that, okay, well, if you take a step back, there are way worse things in life than what I'm dealing with. And if you can find a way to help others through those times, all of a sudden you start to appreciate what you do have: a new son, a wife. You're both alive.
Yeah.
You paid your rent last month. Somebody else didn't. Like there's always something to be grateful for. And so even from a religious standpoint, I think gratitude can lift you out of a lot of dark places. And even when maybe that faith is a lack of faith in God or, Christianity, like there's a lot of things way bigger than us. And we play a very small part. But I do think when things get hard, the best way to find gratitude, the best way to see yourself through a hard place is looking external to how you can help affect others. I don't know what it is. I can't articulate what happens. But for me, there is the most sense of you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right things when you're helping others in a way that nobody else is aware of. That I think is when you feel the most in alignment. For me, it's with Christ. But if you're not Christian, like this, there's just an undeniable feeling and response that comes from that. And I think no matter what religion you are, where you're at, I think if you can use that as your barometer, that feeling of alignment that comes from helping others and worrying about others as much as yourself, I think you're going to live a fulfilled life, whatever that means.
Brother, I love this. It was so fun to catch up. Long overdue. I'm proud to be your friend. Like I hear your story of perseverance and overcoming. And I have as much confidence as you're describing in your own confidence that you will succeed. I've seen it so many times at this point. If I was an investor, and I am an investor, you would be the type of founder that I would back. And it would be like, I don't even need to look at the industry. I just know that if Devin's going to sign up, he's going to stay at that problem until he fixes that problem. He's going to go be resourceful and he's going to go figure it out. And I don't think I could give you a more sincere compliment than that I just, I believe in you.
So from you, Casey.
Anyway, thanks for coming on.
Thanks,
can't wait to see like the next chapter of this book. It's going to be really fun to see how this thing plays out.
It might be a big downturn, and then hopefully the chapter after that's the upturn. Who knows?
All right, brother. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, bud.